Since it's our first episode, I thought it would be fit to start with the ABCs of Flat Earth. And in the ABCs, A is for Antarctica, B is for ball. Why is it a ball? And C is for controlled opposition. I have the perfect person to talk about controlled opposition, the one and only Civilian X. Good morning, Civ.
Hi, hello, good morning.
Hey, thanks for coming on our podcast.
Yeah, thank you for that introduction. That was great.
You're very welcome. I'm very glad to have you, and I'm excited about this podcast. It's my first one. So let's just jump right in. A is for Antarctica, and a lot of shape of Earth discussion ends up being about Antarctica because they told us it is a continent down at the bottom of the globe. But when some of us look into it, we see that it's not that. So what can you tell us about Antarctica, Civ?
Well, I think first I'd like to address the misconception that we can travel to Antarctica freely and unabated.
Yep.
And that is simply not true.
What's stopping us from just getting in a boat and going to Antarctica?
Let's first look at the vacation trips to Antarctica.
Okay.
And then we'll go into some rules and regulations about traveling. So first of all, the majority of people that travel to so-called Antarctica for a vacation, they go to where the penguins are located,
right?
Which is called Fort Lacre, and that is actually an island that is not even connected to the so-called mainland of Antarctica.
Okay.
And the second most popular destination is a place called Falkland Islands, and that is a chain of islands that is considered Antarctica. However, it is actually located more north than the southernmost tip of South America.
Wow.
So the most traveled areas to Antarctica are actually both islands that are not even part of the so-called mainland portion of Antarctica.
Okay, so hold on. People, when they go on their luxury cruise to so-called Antarctica, they're actually visiting the islands where the penguins live. They're not hitting Antarctica. Okay.
Right, correct.
Interesting. Okay.
And speaking of traveling, as far as being a tourist, there's only one single private company in the world that offers a plane trip into the interior of Antarctica. And the name of that company, for anybody that wants to research it, is called White Desert, and it is out of London, UK. And a few notes on that I found interesting myself is that the price of that trip for each person is $84,000.
Nice. Nice.
And there's a 25% fee due up front, and the remaining balance is due 6 months prior to the trip's date.
Okay.
The CEO of that company, his name is Patrick Woodhead, and he has a book titled Beneath the Ice. And it's a science fiction book about a guy that's been hired by M16 to lead a team of scientists 2 miles beneath the surface of Antarctica to discover some secret. And of course, M16 is the British equivalent to our CIA, and their official name is the Secret Intelligence Service, and their motto is Semper Occultus, which means always secret.
Wow. Always hidden. Interesting.
And in correlation, we have the Admiral Byrd's account of going to so-called Antarctica. So in the 90s, somebody decided to write a book that they claim was based off of Admiral Byrd's diary, and he was directed in by aliens into the center of the Earth.
Wow. Okay. Hang on. Let's stop for a second. Talk about Admiral Byrd, because people bring that up a lot. So, total hoax or what, Civ?
I believe so, yes. He may have led an expedition at some point there with planes.
Yeah.
However, I don't believe any of the official stories or accounts that the government has given us or this book that was written in the 90s about his diary.
Okay. So the diary, supposedly his diary was coming up in the 90s.
Right. Somebody found it and decided to write a book about it. Okay. Well after his death, obviously.
Okay.
And then that has perpetuated the theory of Hollow Earth.
Interesting. Okay. Now, backing up a little bit, back to Antarctica and the exploration thereof. Let's just say somebody, normal Joe citizen, wants to go down to Antarctica, check it out. What exactly do they have to do in order to go visit Antarctica?
Okay, well, that's rather lengthy, and I obviously have a lot of notes on that, so I may jump around. But
Okay.
let's discuss if you want to fly there. Okay, so whether or not you own your own plane or you can hire someone who has a plane, but we'll discuss flying there. That's practically nearly impossible. So I'll at least say that and admit that no, nothing's impossible. However, most people do not understand just how much regulations are involved with traveling to Antarctica or probably traveling outside of their country in general. So just some real quick rules as far as flying that people will say, why don't we just fly there? Well, number one, you have what's called CFR 14.
Okay.
And CFR 14 is specifically discussing the Federal Aviation Regulations. So it's all about the FAA and what you must do. Most people already know that if you want to fly a plane, particularly at a certain altitude, you have to do a flight path, stuff like that. That's actually least important. The most important thing is these particular rules concerning Antarctica. If you want to fly a plane to Antarctica, if it's a single-engine plane, you must at all times be no more than 80 miles from an airport.
Huh.
And if it's a double-engine airplane, you cannot be any more than 160 miles from an airport.
Okay.
So we could just begin there. Now, and beyond that as well, there's other things as far as let me look at my notes just so I'll get this right.
Okay, so while you're looking, let me just jump in for a second. That means it's pretty much prohibited to go into these remote areas, because once you do, you're 80 miles from an airport or you're 160 miles from an airport. So right there, you can't just go exploring in these remote areas where there aren't any airports. It's not allowed.
Yes, correct. And they're going to say, for safety reasons, obviously, that you need to be able to make it to an airport. I would assume instead of so-called crashing your plane into Antarctica, causing an environmental catastrophe.
Right.
So, with all of this, at the very least, you would need to do massive research. And we haven't even got into what you actually have to do, but you basically have to do massive research before you would even begin to plan an expedition to Antarctica.
Okay.
So it is next to near impossible, particularly with all of these demands. So within what's called the Antarctic Conservation Act, these are just a few rules that you have to follow if you're even planning going to Antarctica. And if you are to break any of these rules, then that's a $28,000 fine and a year imprisonment.
Well.
So that alone right there would be enough to deter people to even try and going down there, because here's ways that you would violate the Antarctic Conservation Act.
Okay.
And these are all completely ridiculous. And I'm giving sub-notes, however anybody can look this up, obviously, but one note is that you cannot damage plants by walking.
Okay.
All right. No motorized vehicles whatsoever.
In all of Antarctica?
Correct.
Okay.
Unless you are a government-run or government-funded scientific research. This is all about if you want to go Antarctica and explore Antarctica on your own.
Wow, so it's sled dogs only.
No, the next one is no dogs allowed.
And how would you even get them there in the first place?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
Now, and yes, and then we'll get into boating in a second.
Okay,
So taking a plane there is, in my opinion, completely off, because, number one, you'd have to go to visit multiple airports, refuel, and all that. So we haven't even gotten into the cost of it.
Okay.
So that's another thing. People say, why don't flat earthers just go find the edge? Well, none of this is that simple whatsoever. We don't even believe what they say, much less how could we even travel there without even knowing anything. We wouldn't even know where we're traveling or when we should get to the so-called ice wall.
Right.
And another one, this is the last one that I'm going to mention when it comes to the Antarctic Conservation Act, which is the most ridiculous at all. Not only do you have to carry your own excrement with you as you're traveling through Antarctica, you have to get a permit for it.
Oh, snap. That makes it difficult.
Yes, correct. Absolutely ridiculous rules to so-called travel to Antarctica.
Okay, so let's go back to boating for a second, because I think you were telling me once about the different things you have to do if you want to sail to Antarctica.
Yes, correct, treaty, for instance,
Okay.
within the Antarctic Treaty and within what's called the Protocol on Environmental Protection to the Antarctic Treaty, this treaty obliges each party to give advance notification of all expeditions to and within Antarctica.
Okay.
So that is number one, and I believe, as a matter of fact, that's in what's called Article 7, Paragraph 5, is where it specifically mentions that each party of the Antarctic Treaty has to let the other party know. So that's number one there to understand. Now, within that, in bold letters, and I have a screenshot here I'm looking at from the U.S. State Department, and this is the website called travel.state.gov, and it says in bold letters here, all U.S. nationals organizing private expeditions to Antarctica in the United States or proceeding to Antarctica from the United States are required to provide notification to the State Department at least 3 months prior to the intended travel to the Antarctic Treaty area. So specifically, it states on the government website, yet again, that yes, you have to give advance notice. Now, what's that basically saying is, let's say that someone from Canada wants to take their boat to Antarctica. Well, you have to refuel at some point, so let's just say you have to refuel somewhere in America or United States. Well, you have to give the United States 3 months prior notice to letting them know where you're planning on going to there from United States. And, of course, that's just one simple regulation from the very beginning.
So it's not like you're just going on vacation. It's not like you're just flying to France for a couple of weeks. You don't have to let anybody know about that. You just get your passport and you go. This thing you're talking about is a whole different thing. Like, you have to inform them months in advance, and it's probably not just a matter of informing, it's probably a matter of getting their permission.
Yes, correct. You have to fill out a form, and that form that you fill out is called the Advance Notification Form, and I've got the code written down in case anybody wants to look it up. It's DS4131. And within that form, the important part about it is that you're going to have to give them what's called an Environmental Impact Assessment Statement. And the cost of that can be anywhere between $250,000 and $2 million. So that one there pretty much puts any expedition from America, and other countries have their own rules as well, and I'll go in a little bit deeper with that, but yes, that pretty much puts any trip to Antarctica dead in the water right there, because the cost of the money alone for the Environmental Impact Statement.
That's telling me that Joe Citizen cannot go to Antarctica.
No, and that's the thing is, too, when you fill out this and you tell them the reason why you want to go to Antarctica, well, you certainly aren't going to tell them you want to go prove the Earth is flat.
That's right. You're looking for the edge. You can't tell them that.
And it's going to have to be for scientific reasons. There's going to have to be a so-called scientific benefit to why you want to go to Antarctica to get it approved. Now, even if your country of origin approves it, and that's a huge if, all the other countries that have signed the treaty have to also approve it, which is even a bigger hurdle. Now, there's a lot more in between there about ifs, and you actually mentioned traveling. Well, let's say just boating or sailing, as we'll call it. If you plan to leave your country of origin, and particularly in the U.S., it's 15 miles, you're now in international waters. If you plan to leave international waters, you have to let your country of origin know. And